All right, we can probably get started. So my name's Morgan Menino. I'm kind of the behind the scenes person for Voyage Fromage, or one of the people. I'm the one that sends the reminder emails to you guys and that sort of thing. But we have two experts here that are really going to be the stars of the show tonight. We have David Robinson, our import manager. He's the one presenting the slides here. And then we have Marc Hernandez, our head cheese buyer. Great. So I'm going to turn it over to them, and they're going to dive into this month's theme, which is cheeses from Switzerland.
Thank you, Morgan. So thank you guys very much for joining us on a Friday evening to talk about cheese or learn about cheese and taste a little cheese from Switzerland. So Switzerland is a really fascinating country for cheese in so many ways, and we'll get into this for a couple of reasons. Just to give you a little bit of background on this, so Mark and I have been traveling to Switzerland to choose a lot of our Swiss cheeses for several years now. We've brought chefs to Switzerland. We've visited farms. We've visited caves, etc. So we've learned a lot about what's going on. We're super excited about a lot of it, and some of what we're going to tell you, some of the stories. It's really fascinating in that I think it's a lot of very misunderstood of what is happening in Switzerland and what has happened in Switzerland in terms of cheese. So it's going to be a lot of fun that we're going to do right now. I do encourage you to ask questions as we go along. I believe Morgan could probably, she'll be monitoring us. If there's easier for you to pipe in, cool. Otherwise, type in a question. We'll either or. So as long as we get questions answered, we're going to be fantastic. So we're going to have a lot of fun. So what we're going to be doing, obviously, is talking about cheese in Switzerland. So sort of one brief about the slide that is shown with you. These are sort of just pictures of Switzerland from our journeys. Pastures, as you can see, cows. There's a picture of Isan in front of what looks like a cave, or sorry, a brick wall or a rock wall. And that is literally in front of a cave going into a long fort. We'll go into that later. There's Alpage cheese making in terms of the fire, cheese makers, and a couple other things. So the slides are more or less for your visual interpretation. A little bit less specifically about the cheeses, which we'll obviously get into a little bit in a minute. So we're gonna have fun with this. Switzerland is a near and dear place to both of us, to all of us here at Formaggio as well. So we're gonna have a lot of fun. So Mark, why don't you say hello, and then we'll get going.
Hi, I'm Mark. I'm the head cheese buyer at Formaggio Kitchen. As David mentioned, we've traveled a few times to Switzerland to help select some of these cheeses. So a lot of these cheeses that you're going to be trying are going to be things that are pretty rare in the United States, and going to be things that you're not going to be able to find elsewhere due to our relationship with our suppliers in Switzerland that curate some of the best cheeses around to then be able to send to us to offer you guys. So we've got some cheeses that are like near and dear to our hearts, some like really small production cheeses that we hope you enjoy tonight, and we'll be able to tell you a little bit more about what makes them so special, and sort of like what you should be looking for in trying those cheeses, and what makes them stand out from the rest of the Swiss cheeses that you're familiar with, and what you'll be able to find elsewhere in the country.
Good way to put it, Mark. So we do have 4 cheeses in front of us: Le Fortin, Le Beaumanoise, Gruyere Reserve, and Bleu de Gruyere. So we're going to be tasting these, and I'm going to be a little loose on tasting because I think that some of the story behind not just specifically the cheeses, but Swiss cheeses in general, the fort that a lot of these cheeses are aged in, I think a lot of that is almost as interesting, if not even more pertinent to what we do. So as Mark said, we're trying cheeses that are not available in the U.S. for the most part. So we work with an appaneur, somebody who ages cheeses, in Switzerland, that's based in a small village called Villeneuve. Now, Villeneuve is, honestly, if you didn't know it was there, you would never know it's there. It's a small little village on the, sorry, forgive my for not remembering direction, on the far eastern edge of Lake Geneva, or Lac du Mont if you're from there. That is nondescript. There's virtually nothing there. It's literally right next door to Montreux, and if you're familiar with Jazz Fest or jazz music in general, Montreux is a very famous area for that. But Villeneuve itself is very nondescript, and the avenue we work with has an aging facility in their offices in this small village. But what they do and what they've been known for since 1958 when they started is working with small farms to basically to age and get out small production cheeses into Switzerland and then into the rest of Europe. Now, what's interesting a lot about this, or a lot of interesting about this, is that Switzerland for a long time, really up until about 1999, was not known for its selection of cheeses. And the reason I bring this up is because what was called the Swiss Cheese Union, or if you start looking into folklore about this, it's called the Swiss Cheese Mafia, was a group of people who literally controlled the entire Swiss cheese production, naming rights, prices of milk, prices of cheese, everything for about 85 years. So starting in the early 1900s, Swiss cheese was as renowned as it was today, if not longer. It's just that a group of people decided that they need to maximize profits, right? And so the Swiss Cheese Union was formed, and the Swiss Cheese Union dictated pricing for the price of milk. They dictated pricing for what producers could make. They dictated what producers could produce. They wanted several things to be foremost and prominent. There was Gruyere, there was Emmental. Those were the 2 most important cheeses that they wanted. There's a few other cheeses sort of grandfathered in, for lack of a better word. Vacheron Bourgeois was grandfathered in. They didn't want anybody new making it, but they wouldn't discount somebody for making it. But if somebody wanted to make it, somebody who was not making a specific cheese wanted to make a cheese, a different cheese than what they were doing, essentially they were not allowed. So the easiest example, or the easiest example I could find, was a producer of cheese. They were making Gruyere, but they wanted to make a cheese called Sbrinz. Now it's called SBRINZ, Sbrinz, which is very little production in Switzerland. Even back then, even though there was little production, there were rules. There was no silage. There was all these rules about it. But a producer who was making Gruyere in this area said, I want to make Sbrinz cheese. So they applied for this, and they went to the Swiss Cheese Union and said, I want to make this cheese. And for 8 years, the Swiss Cheese Union hemmed and hawed and eventually said no. So they were not allowed to make Sbrinz. They kind of fought the system. They became a rebel. And what they did was they made Swiss cheese on the side and sold it in kind of what was on the black market. And this happened in Switzerland for a long time. Now, the reason I bring this up is because as we introduce our first couple new cheeses and the fourth that we're about to talk about where these cheeses are aged, it's very important that these cheeses 30 years ago would have been available, but not to us and not to you unless you had a connection. So this black market of cheese was a very serious thing. There were cheesemakers who were fighting the system, but it couldn't be brought down. And so they went to the black market. So what eventually did bring the cheese mafia or the Swiss cheese union down was literally bureaucratic lying or bullshit, if you will. So there was discrepancies in terms of marketing. There was discrepancies in terms of money, and eventually caught up to the Swiss cheese union, and it sort of faltered. Once it happened, and this was 1999. We're talking 25 years ago at this point or less. That's when the Swiss cheese market blew up and expanded in a way that we never would have had that chance. So when Formaggio Kitchen first started importing cheese on the regular and became more intent in terms of purposing, or be purposeful in who we were choosing and what cheeses and selecting and being getting exclusives, we were at the forefront of Swiss cheese production in terms of artisanal production. So 23 years ago, we were in the beginning of this. Now, fast forward a few years, and a lot of those cheeses start becoming available to more and more people. And we've searched high and low and all over the place to be able to find cheeses that we feel not only are exclusive or small production, but fit what we want to do. And so that's what we've done. So what we're about to taste is all in line with that. And so we're going to have a lot of fun with this, even though these are similar cheeses in terms of style, the production method and the stories behind it are kind of a lot of fun. So before we start tasting, Mark, is there anything you want to add before we start tasting? And we're going to start on La Fortin, Mark.
Yeah, no, for sure. Thank you for all that background, David. A little bit about where we get these cheeses from. I know David touched on it a little bit, but these are individuals that we have a direct connection with that collect some of the best cheeses from the area, and they age them essentially. So they guide them to a place where these cheeses are top quality for us to consume. And so we get a really unique opportunity to search for some of these cheeses, like a very centralized location where we can trust the sources that we work with to present some of the best cheeses around for us to import to then provide for you all. And so the first cheese that we're going to taste is Le Fortin, which is a cheese that we started importing a few years ago. Essentially, it's fairly similar to Gruyere in terms of like make and flavor, I guess you could say, but it's smaller format, which is going to result in a quicker ripening time. But at the same time, you're going to get different textures and different things coming out in the cheese that you wouldn't really expect to get in an extra aged Gruyere. And so this is a cheese that we brought in trying to see how that was going to do on our counter with like a plethora of Alpine style cheeses, and it's done very, very well. So when we say Alpine style cheeses, we're talking about cheeses first and foremost that are made in the Alps, so mountain cheeses. This particular cheese is made with thermalized cow's milk thermalized cow's milk, which thermalization is the process of heat treating milk that doesn't quite meet the standard of the United States pasteurization level, but in the European I guess Switzerland's not European, but in the Swiss standard of things, it doesn't indicate, or it does indicate pasteurization. So it indicates like a heat treated milk to be formed into this cheese that we're enjoying. And then it's washed with salt, essentially, to introduce the salt to the cheese. And so you're going to get like a little bit of a sticky rind, a little bit of a funk, a little bit of a aromatic cheese, but flavor wise you're going to get a really creamy, nutty, really savory with a slight sweetness to it cheese. And so this has been one that we've thoroughly enjoyed over the past couple of years.
So one, there's a slide that I think it's viewable to everybody. If it's not, let me know and we'll figure it out. Of a cheese. So sort of diagonal on this cheese, it says Le Fortin. So this name comes from really fascinating, which we're going to talk about. This name comes because it's aged in this fort. So the appler that we work with owns a fort, or owns an export in the Alps, right, or in the mountains. In what is the village is called Rossinière. It's in an area called Donau, and the valley is called the Combe. So there's a lot of different names in there. We can, if you really want them, I will email them to you and I'll give you that information later. But so this fort was a fort that was built during World War II, as were a number of forts in this area. They were munitions forts that are all connected basically through underground and overground tunnels, like through mountains, into gorges, etc. It's a really crazy thing. So Le Fortin is named after the fort. The fort is called Fort de la Tine, Tine. But this is a cheese that they worked with a cheesemaker to make for them. So one, you will not see this cheese outside of, in the U.S., you won't see it outside of Formaggio Kitchen. I don't think they sell this to anywhere else in or outside of Switzerland, but I know they sell it to cheese shops in Switzerland, in Geneva specifically, and Zurich. So you won't see this cheese much, and it's really fantastic and interesting in so many ways. As Mark said, there's Gruyere-esque, but it's not. It's a little milder. It's a little more subtle. It's a little more. It's not. I don't know if interesting is the right word, because that's such a subjective word. But it's really fascinating. That to me, this is a really wonderful way to start a meal. Whereas a lot of Gruyères to me can be a little saltier and a little bigger. This is a fantastic, subtle, nuanced way of eating cheese. And if we talk about eating and tasting cheese, when Mark and I go and travel and taste a lot of cheeses, the amount of cheese that you're seeing in front of you is nothing we ever get the chance to do. So, like I can sort of show you in this little photo, a little piece of cheese. Generally, when we taste the cheese and then we make a judgment on it's this little tiny little piece or smaller, and we sort of taste it, make a selection, or decide if that's right or wrong. So we kind of have a lot of fun with it. So Fortin is a cheese that we did this with, where we tasted a little small amount, tasted this in the fort. And by the way, if you want to see the fort, which I should have said at the beginning, there's a slide where there's a gentleman, which is Isan Gerdal, the founder of Formaggio Kitchen, standing in front of a brick or a rock wall. Literally, he's standing in front of a door, and next to it is a stairwell that is leading downward. It's a weird picture. It's leading downward into the tunnel. So if you want to know what a fort in Switzerland looked like in World War II, that's what it looked like. There's other photos, but these are pretty solid. So Mark and I taste these cheeses, make a decision, a snap decision, whether we like it or not. So, one, I hope you guys taste this. Taste it with a couple things in mind. One, if you have the wine or whatever wine you're drinking, whether it's a Swiss wine that we've recommended or anything else, it's going to taste a little different. But it's a really, really subtle cheese. There's a little fruit forward, but it's not overly sweet. There's a little bit of grassiness, but it's not overly so. It's really, really pleasant. Always a big fan. That wash rind quality of this cheese is subtle. You only get a little bit of funk, but it's really, really pleasant. I hope everybody is enjoying this cheese and will continue to do so. And I hope you enjoyed it with whatever wine or whatever condiment you're drinking or eating with. So I hope that kind of works and it's good for you. Anybody have any questions at this point so far? Otherwise, we can sort of keep moving on.
General thoughts on the cheese? Anybody really enjoy it?
Really creamy. Really nice.
Yes,
Creamy, really nice, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. It's not the most complex cheese I've ever had. It's really tasty though. And if you ever look for pairing wines, great with white, great with reds, great with beer. Alpine cheese during the summer, this is a good one because it's not too heavy.
So, David, we're with the wine you recommended.
Right. So there were. I think when we sent it out, there were two wines, right? Or maybe there's one.
No,
The Dole.
There's only one.
Say again. Did you guys
There's
get it?
only one.
Yes.
The Dole.
Yeah, the Gamay Pinot Noir blend.
Yes.
It's delicious. It's
Right.
great.
Oh, it's
Excellent.
amazing wine. For those of you who did not get a chance to have this wine or get this wine, one, I will say this about Swiss wines. If you see Swiss wines, buy them. They're few and far between in the States, and it's too bad because they produce some amazing, amazing wines. I think they export less than 9% of what they produce, so they're few and far between. But I generally find if you see a red or white from Switzerland, it's almost always a great quality simply because they don't export enough and it's good quality. This is, again, it's a Pinot Noir and Gamay blend, which is new to this is from the Valais, which is southern Switzerland, fairly close to the Italian border. A lot of great cheese comes from this area. One of our favorite raclettes and other cheeses come from this area. So, but their wines from this area are some of the best you'll ever get. And a lot of cheeses do not necessarily work well with red wines, and these do. And this red wine works with so many cheeses. It's fantastic. So again, the producer is Dole, and this is it's a family-run business. They're organic. They're certified organic. They've been around for a while, although the son, Olivier Roté, has taken over the business, and what they produce is all amazing. They do 100% Gamays. They do a lot of whites that are fantastic. If you find them, please, please, please buy them. They're amazing. But that will lead sort of into our. I'm sorry. Did anybody have another question or comment?
Sure. Yeah, I was going to say, David, we're having it with not with the wine you recommended.
Yep.
We've got a Cabernet Sauvignon from Margaret River.
Okay.
You know that area?
Yeah.
And it really, really goes well with it. It stands up to it. It sort of holds up. I love the description of Gruyere-esque that you had, because I think it really is. A Gruyere often feels very strong. It's a fondue kind cheese, and you think of it in that very strong way. This actually works well and doesn't overpower the wine, but it stands up incredibly well to a very full-bodied wine.
Good. No, I like to hear that, because one person, if I talk about drinking red wine with any cheese, doesn't matter what it is, I almost never go full bodied. I tend to go lighter, and so to know, but I believe this cheese, and I think the other ones we're going to try will also go along with that as well. It's it's rarity. So I'm so happy to hear that it works really well. I'm glad to hear that. So it's one good mental note for me. And I hope everybody else sort of takes note of that as well. So thank you so much for that.
Hey, David, since we're
Go ahead.
contributing on wine drinking, we decided to go with a white, and we're going with an Alsatian Riesling, which is slightly sweet, which goes really well with this, right?
Oh,
It's
interesting.
pulling out that sweetness of this cheese just a little bit.
No, well, one that's interesting for a couple of reasons. One, because if I think of Alsatian whites, I generally think of bone dry. So I and which would make sense to me. I think that this cheese, as almost everything we're tasting, works really well with white wines. I need to know. I'm glad to know that an Alsatian white works well. Again, I would do whites first almost every time. Just because I know that they'll work, but I'm glad to know that one, reds, and two, a slightly sweet Alsatian works as well. That's wonderful to know. In which I think is interesting because the next cheese we're tasting, the La Bemontoise, is sort of in the same vein, but changing the, I don't know if the nuance is the right word or if it's just the subtleties of it. The Bemontoise to me has a bigger flavor profile. At the same time, though, isn't necessarily stronger. It's just more complex. There's a lot more going on. And I think that when we talk about the red wines we're drinking, the white wine, it'll change a little bit more so. So Bemontoise is interesting in that. So we tasted the Fortin, which is made in the Vaud area near Fribourg. When you talk about the Bemontoise is interesting because where it's made in Switzerland is near Neuchâtel, and there's a lake, Neuchâtel, that literally borders the French area of the French Jura. So there's a Swiss Jura, there's a French Jura. The French Jura, though, is where most Comté is made. And Comté in France has a lot of differences to me than Gruyere. So Bemontoise, the cows are grazing and fed on the same grasses in areas that a lot of French Comté is made. And so you end up with a very different style of cheese. Excuse me, a different style or a different flavor profile of cheese. One of the reasons is most of the cows that are grazing or that they make Bemontoise are more similar to Comté. So when you talk about Gruyere or the Fortin we just tried, the cows are usually what they're referred to as Swiss brown or Swiss cows, right? With Bemontoise, similar to Comté in France, they're using mostly Montbéliard. There is a little bit of Holstein mixed in, and you'll see some Swiss brown, but it's more Montbéliard. So the milk quality is very different. It's to me, it's a richer milk in comparison. So even though the strength is different, the milk quality is a little more similar to Comté than it is to Gruyere. So I think we're talking apples and oranges. I mean, we're really cutting corner, or not in corner. Sorry, we're really like going on a thin dime here of differences. But the richness in the Bemontoise to me is more profound and more enunciated than it was in the Fortin, even though they're similarly made. Now again, like Fortin, which was made for our Appenor, so is Bemontoise. You won't see Bemontoise outside of, as far as I know, they sell it to a couple places in southern France and in Paris, and that's about it, and places in Switzerland. So again, you will not see it elsewhere. It's a fairly interesting cheese, or a very interesting cheese. So again, as we taste this, please taste it with the wine, taste it as it is, and let's go on. Mark, do you have anything to add to this?
Yeah, I mean, this cheese to me is like a completely different and contrasting cheese to both Le Fortin and the Gruyere that you're going to be trying in a little bit. What I love about this cheese is it tends to have like a little herbaceous quality to it. The saltiness is amplified a little bit, but it is a very small production. Actually, one of the individuals who we work with from our Comté production, he rides his bike past this production daily and has nothing but positive things to say about it. So there's no animosity between our Comté and Le Bementois. Totally different cheeses, totally different scales, so on and so forth. But it's a really, really special cheese that you're not going to be able to find similar cheeses in the country for sure. But it is variable. Time of the year definitely affects the flavors that you're going to get on the cheese. And David, if I'm not wrong, this cheese is about 9 months. And you're going to get like a lot of those like more defined flavors from this cheese too. The wheel itself is probably about 20 pounds. And you're going to get more age out of that. You're going to be able to age that out a little bit further than something like Le Fortin, which is about 10 to 12 pounds in a wheel.
What's the difference in the aging? The Benetois seems like it's a little bit drier, not quite as creamy. Is that due to aging?
It can be the style of the cheese. In this case, yeah, it's the aging. But it also could be the conditions of the cave, so on and so forth. So like it has a lot to do with many variables. But I think you're right. This Bementois is going to be a little bit drier, a little bit more granular in texture. You're also going to get more of a pronounced saltiness from this cheese.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. The other thing about these cheeses is one, size, right? So Fortin is a smaller format. It's weighs, I think, about 11 pounds. And it ages, it's not aged as long. Bementois is aged about 6 to 8 months at any given time. Larger format. The curds are cut slightly smaller, which when you cut curds smaller, you're going to have a different texture altogether. And so that dry texture is a combination of cave, humidity, curds being cut a little smaller, and also, again, the different cows that are used to make this or that are producing the milk for this. So Montbéliard cows produce milk that is specific fat content. Swiss Browns produce a milk that's a certain fat content. And so you have these variables that are sort of hard to quantify until you really like start tasting them all side by side by side. And you know, if you ever get a chance, which that's probably a future class in this vein of same cheeses or almost same cheeses, different cows or different animals producing it, so we can see almost the exact same thing. We're getting a little bit of that tonight, but not severe. So there's a lot of factors in why that happens, but it's a combination of a lot of things, and sometimes it's simple to quantify, and sometimes it's a little bit less so. I hope that answers that well enough.
It did, and the cheese is wonderful. So
Yeah. Regardless of texture, it tastes delicious. It's amazing. Now the next two cheeses, right? So we're talking about Gruyere and Bleu de Gruyere or Bleu de la Gruyere. So one, I'll first start with Bleu de la Gruyere, not because we're going to taste it first, but because it's an anomaly. And the reason I say it's an anomaly is that very few producers will take milk that someone is going to make into Gruyere and turn it into blue or anything else for that matter. So one of those reasons that doesn't happen is we go back to the Swiss cheese mafia that we mentioned in the beginning, in that if you are in the area of Fribourg or the Vaud or a little bit north of that, you would never, ever dream of making anything but Gruyere from the milk from these cows. It's some of the best milk you'll find. As a raw material, it's amazing. So for somebody to decide to make a blue out of this was sort of mind-blowing for a lot of reasons, which is why I bring it up first. And so as we sort of transition, you can taste the blue whenever you want. I don't think it's going to overpower anything, particularly because the Gruyere we're tasting is one so flavorful and it's strong enough and salty enough that we're good. So we're talking about two cheeses, the Gruyere, which are Gruyere Reserve, versus the Bleu de Gruyere, same exact milk. And the only thing I would say is similar in this is there's a really particular richness in both of these, which I think is unique to this type of cheese. This type of Gruyere, this type of blue, you won't find this anywhere. If you taste cheese from the French Jura, blue cheese from the French Jura, it does not have this richness. But this blue cheese from Switzerland does. And it's unlike any other blue Swiss I've ever had. It's really amazing. So one is, let's talk about the Gruyere a little bit, because, you know, as I brought up the Gruyere from the beginning, Gruyere is fascinating for a lot of reasons, in that it is Swiss, but it has a huge impact on European cheesemaking, European diplomacy, if you will, for many reasons. So Gruyere cheese, as we know it, has been known since the 12th century. About 15 that people talked about Gruyere as we know it today. So this is a wheel that's about 80 pounds, right? 40 kilos, 36 to 40 kilos at any given point. It's a cooked curd, which means they heat it to about 130 degrees Fahrenheit, and they cut the curds fairly small. The reasons they did this is that to cook the curd and cut them small, they could create these large wheels that would be pliable to carry from high altitude into the valleys and not break. It also had a really wonderful side effect in the being wonderful to melt, right? So Comté, Gruyere, Fontina, Raclette, these are all cheeses that are cooked, is the term. And this allows, this really does sort of create a particular flavor profile, but also make these amazingly meltable cheeses, which is why it's great in fondue. So Gruyere was made then. It was always made. It sort of gained prominence into the 1700s, where it started to be imported more and more. The name Gruyere, in terms of what the cheese was called, became prominent in the 1700s. And then eventually, I mean, it was 100 years after that, it's the 1800s, where it really became codified, where you got Gruyere, you know you got Gruyere. It came from Switzerland. There was Comté in France. It was called Gruyere de Comté, but that got put away in the early 1900s, where in treaties, literally treaties in Madrid and Rome and a third city, and forgive me for not remembering, where essentially governments came together and said, we will not call any other cheese Gruyere but Gruyere from Switzerland, made in this area, and that's it. It was one of the first times that this was codified in this way. Now, granted, Gruyere didn't gain AOC, which was a controlled name within Switzerland, or AOP, which is a controlled name within Europe, until the early 2000s and 2010. Still, people stopped saying any name other than Gruyere in Europe because of these treaties in the, I believe the last one in Rome was in 1931. But so it became codified early. Now, the cheese mafia, as I sort of mentioned earlier, controlled all these things: price, price of milk, price of cheese. They also did really one important thing, more important now than we like to admit, because we don't like to admit that the cheese mafia was that important, is they they pushed fondue to be the national cheese of Switzerland. And they did this, started a big push in the 50s into the 60s. And that helped create a couple things. This worldwide phenomena for fondue and Swiss cheese, right? So if anybody still has a red fondue pot, that sort of thin red fondue pot, which I have one because they're great. That's a direct result of the cheese mafia in the 60s pushing fondue to be the national dish, and therefore sort of just push into the rest of the world. Fondue is still amazing. I don't care what anybody says. It's a wonderful thing. And if that's their lasting legacy, fantastic. That's great. But Gruyere really became the centerpiece of this, and became the centerpiece of fondue in any fondue recipe that you see in Switzerland, and still holds true to this day. It's one of my favorite fondue bases at all. So the Gruyere you're tasting right now specifically is made by a gentleman named Marc Hernandez, and he's a really small producer, which is less common for Gruyere. He does not own the cows, but he makes the cheese. Like the system in a lot of the Jura in France and Switzerland, it's a fruitier system. There are farmers who farm. They pull their milk, and Marc then makes the cheese. His cheese in the U.S. is only found within Formaggio kitchen shops, and that's the only place you'll find it. It's aged 18 to about 20 months. It's sort of depending on the wheel. The one that we're having is, honestly, I think it's borderline 18 months. I think it might actually be a little younger, but that's quite all right. It's interesting. It's fascinating. It's super subtle, but there's good salt to it. What's typical about this Gruyere to me, and Marc, tell me if you agree with this, isn't so much the flavor profile as it is there's a particular salt level to it that is just, it's salty, but it's not over the top. You can, on your palate, you can taste that it will melt well. And there's all these little sort of flavor profiles going on where it's strong, but it's not over the top. It's really wonderful.
Well, it's the balance, but also the texture of the cheese is like astounding. And so if you taste this alongside any other Gruyere you're going to find at Whole Foods or at the supermarket, this is going to be far less plasticky, more fudgy in texture. But you're right, David, like the balanced flavor of it is what really drives it home for me. Gruyere can either be like too sweet or like too salty, and this is neither of those things. The nuanced flavors come through beautifully in this, and you're able to come away with like a very, very rich cheese, but something that is tasteful and balanced, which is like, I think, something that a lot of productions sort of miss with this cheese.
Yeah, definitely. And also, just as a side note, I just pulled up a slide of the cave where this starts. So, not Marc that I'm talking to, but Marc that makes the cheese, ages his cheese for anywhere between 2 to 4 weeks. And as you can see, this cheese, it says Le Gruyere. It's a very, they usually refer to these cheeses as yellow cheeses because they're so young. That rind is sort of a yellowish color. By the time we get it, it starts to turn, or it has a sort of a brown color. Let me see. We don't have, even by the time we get it, you'll see mites sort of getting into, cheese mites getting into it, where the rind gets a little funky and different. But this is what the cheese looks like in the cave. Really, I think this is about a week and a half to 2 weeks after it was made. So they stamp it with a Le Gruyere, but it's so different. It's sort of fat, and it's kind of fun. It's fun to see. Plus, if you ever taste a cheese this young, it doesn't taste like any cheese you would recognize. It's flat, and it's rubbery in texture. It's really interesting. So to watch them grow is fun. But that's what a wheel Gruyere looks like within a week or two of it being made. Is that right there? Really fun cheese. Has anybody ever had a Gruyere that's slightly different that you can sort of compare this to? Do you say it could be better, it could be worse? I'm not even worried about that, but really, but just different from this. Or even Comte or anything. It's such a different cheese. That's right. So, but based on that, only one, because we're sort of cutting a little short in time, and I want to make sure we taste everything and have, if any questions we need to answer, we'll move to the Blue de la Gruyere. So, Blue de la Gruyere, as I mentioned, is an anomaly and a rarity because it's made with the same milk as the Gruyere you just had, same cows, that same richness. But this is a cheese that comes from a really small producer. The family is the Oudry family. And the Oudry family, I think they're 5th generation or 6th generation. I could be wrong. Could be older, could be younger, but not by much. Cheesemakers, sort of, their fromagerie is on what is called Lake Gruyere or La Gruyere, very close to the village of Gruyere. And their imagery that they use is the heron, because the heron is prevalent, or was for years, on the lake, and it became the symbol of Gruyere for a long time. Unfortunately, with climate change, etc., the heron became a little bit less and less prevalent, but it started to migrate back to this lake. Anyway, the Oudry family has used the heron as their symbol. But more importantly is that they're making this really amazing blue cheese. And they're one of a handful of blue cheese producers in this area. So really, to make this, they took a couple different steps. And that when they first started to make this cheese, they experimented with the different penicilliums that are used to make blue cheese. They use penicillium from Roquefort. They use penicillium from Italy to make Gorgonzola, and eventually settled on a rarely used penicillium from the Jura, France, to make bleu de Gex. And so this is a penicillium that produces blues that tend to be slightly less spicy than you would with Roqueforts, or even Gorgonzola or Gorgonzola Picante specific, but produces a very particular flavor profile as well. And so you end up with a super rich, super creamy texture with a really particular spiciness that is completely unique to the blue world to me. It's a lot of fun. It's really unique. It's so different. And it's so versatile. It's blue cheese as well that I would say works well with red wine, which I completely would never do. Not my first choice to do blue cheese in red wine at all. This one, on the other hand, I think works very well. It's a rarity in that way. So one, I could talk a little bit more of this cheese, but I'm so curious as to what everybody thinks, specifically this cheese, as well as others, but because it's such a unique and different cheese. And I'd love to hear people's thoughts on this, and also thoughts on other cheeses and other questions you might have.
The blue is absolutely amazing.
Stunning.
Stunning. Absolutely amazing.
Isn't it really amazing?
It's incredible.
It's so
Yeah.
good. The blue is the winner for the night for us.
So good.
I agree for many reasons. I think it's unexpected for a lot of, it's an unexpected blue. It's really far out.
How
There's
long
a
is
real-
that? How long is the blue aged for?
So the blue is aged, Mark, tell me if I'm wrong, but I think it's about 4 to 5 months, or am I a little off?
No, you're right.
Okay.
4 or 5 months. Yeah. And that like brings to question like an important subject of like, why would someone make a blue cheese from Gruyere milk when they could make Gruyere and get, honestly, like probably more money for it? And when you think about like investment and return on your investment, something that's aged this quickly is a quicker return on investment. And so you're thinking about cash flow, right? And so like when we're talking about cheesemakers of this magnitude, or people that are extra aging cheese, you're going to want to diversify your selection to offer things that require less aging, less time, not to say less effort, because blue cheeses are notoriously difficult to make and make well. It's a wild thing when you're trying to introduce the mold into the center of the cheese to develop flavors. But when you're talking about diversifying your sort of cash flow, or the selection to influence the cash flow, it makes sense. It makes total sense. But yeah, this cheese is fantastic. I love again the texture of this cheese, the richness of the cheese, and a lot of times I can get notes of dark chocolate in this cheese, and it comes across as being like more of that finisher to me, something that does stand up to red wine and sweeter wines, but it lacks that sort of punch that you would get from some other stronger blue cheeses, and that's okay. I love this cheese.
It's so interesting what you just said, Mark. I'm fascinated. I mean, this cheese, if you'd asked me what the strongest cheese was, I was starting to think of Gruyere, and I was saying Gruyere to my wife. And then I said, no, Roquefort is going to be the answer. It's going to hit you in the face. And this cheese combines both of those. I think it's a marketing genius. I mean, I don't know how well they're selling, but I mean, I hope they're selling well. But it's like the cheeses. It doesn't even stand up to the strength of the red wine that we were using. I mean, it needs something more than that. It's so strong. It just hits you. It's incredible. I'm amazed.
Now, Mark, given that that's aged 6 months, how long would a wheel of that last?
I mean, it has some legs on it. So it's going to change, obviously, the longer we hold on to it or the longer it's aged. This is like at the optimal stage. If you're going to hang on to it for longer, if it's going to age longer, you're going to get an increased saltiness. The texture is going to break down a little bit, and you're going to get more of a granular texture. But right now, this is exactly where I would want it.
I would agree. It is total surprise.
So this is the time of year when this cheese comes in? Is that typical?
It's not necessarily the time of the year. So we're gonna get this cheese year round.
Oh, you are.
Yeah,
That's good to know.
So yeah, definitely. It varies in availability, just depending. Like, we want to sell it when we get it in at this stage, and so we don't want to overbuy and like hang on to wheels, because like I said, it's gonna suffer texturally, flavor wise, so on and so forth. But with the season, you're going to get subtle differences in the texture and the flavor.
Sure.
I would say with this cheese, I think when we first started buying it, where which happens, where you don't know what's going to happen, so you either over or under buy the cheese, and so I think the first couple times we brought this in, we brought in too much, and cheeses sat for a while longer than we wanted to, and I will be very honest to say that other than it getting a little stronger at some point in its life, the flavor never diminished and it never tasted off. This cheese has a lot of legs, as Mark said. It really holds up well. I prefer it now or even a little bit younger, but if it's aged longer, it's pretty damn good.
You
So,
said in the
yes,
literature,
you can always look
lavender
forward. Go
honey
ahead.
or something with it.
Sorry, go ahead.
You said in the literature some lavender honey or something would go well with it.
Oh God, yeah, definitely. I mean, if you're talking about blue cheese and honey, to me that is a match made in heaven.
Yeah.
So yeah, but with this, like particularly where you're having it now, I wouldn't go too floral.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't go too strong. Like my favorite honey is chestnut honey, which would be way too strong for this. At this point in its life, maybe it's a little older, yeah. But no, a nice, soft, subtle honey would be fantastic with this blue cheese right now.